This man had nothing, absolutely nothing. No money, no family, no future. And on the darkest night of his entire life, he found one piece of paper. That paper gave him exactly 90 days. And what he did in those 90 days, no one saw coming, not even him. Before we dive in, what time are you listening right now? Where are you from? Drop a comment below and tell me. And please like and subscribe for more videos like this. His name was Daniel, 29 years old, and his life had already broken apart. Not slowly, fast. One morning he had a job. By evening he did not. One week his mother was a phone call away. The next week she was in another city trying to survive on her own. His father left. Even before that, his two older brothers stopped calling months ago, not out of hate. Out of exhaustion, everyone in Daniel's life had run out of energy to hold things together. And Daniel, the youngest, the one everyone used to look after, was suddenly the one no one was looking after at all. He ended up in a small room, a room that cost almost nothing because it was worth almost nothing. A single bed, a single light, a single door that he locked every night. Not because he was afraid of someone coming in, but because he was afraid of someone seeing how he was living. He had no job, no savings, no plan, nothing, just four walls and a mind that had started believing this was forever. And here is the dangerous part. When you believe something is forever, you stop fighting it. Daniel stopped fighting. He stopped applying for work. He stopped going outside with any purpose. He stopped calling anyone. He just existed day after day like a person who had already given up, but was still breathing. But one night that changed. He was walking. No reason, no destination. Just walking because the room felt like a cage and he needed air. The streets were empty. The light from the shops was dim. And he passed one small shop that he had passed 100 times before. But this time something in the window caught his eye. A piece of paper, small, torn, stuck to the glass like someone had placed it there without even thinking. And on that paper, in simple handwriting, were just a few words. 90 days. That is all you need. 90 days to decide who you are going to become. Daniel stopped, aerated it once, twice, 3 times, and something happened inside his chest. Not a big feeling, not a dramatic rush. A crack, a small crack in something that had been sealed shut for a very long time. And through that crack, one single thought entered his mind. What if? What if 90 days is actually enough? What if I actually try? He went home. He sat on that bed and he did something he had not done in months. He made a decision. He grabbed a piece of paper. He wrote the number 90 on it and he stuck it on the wall right in front of where he slept. So the first thing he would see every morning was that number 90 days. That was his deadline. That was his fight, and it started tomorrow. Day 1 was not dramatic. He woke up, he looked at the number, and he got up. That was it. He got up and he walked outside. But understand this, for a man who had been lying in that bed day after day doing nothing, getting up and walking outside was not small. It was the hardest thing he had done in weeks, because every part of his mind was telling him, what is the point? And for the first time in a long time, he answered that voice. He said, I do not know yet, but I am going to find out. Day 5, he started walking with purpose, not to any specific place, but with his eyes open. He started watching how the world worked, how people moved, how things were done, how someone could go from having nothing to having something. He watched carefully, like a man studying a map he had never seen before, like a man who was finally, after a very long sleep, actually paying attention. Day 8, he saw a notice board outside a small shop. Jobs and opportunities written on small pieces of paper, pinned one next to another. He had seen boards like this before. He had walked past them dozens of times, but this time he stopped. He read every single notice and one of them stood out. It said, Community Center, volunteers needed. No experience required. Just show up. Just show up. 3 words. And something about those 3 words made Daniel feel like they had been written specifically for him. Day 10. He walked into that community center, and the moment he stepped through those doors, something started that he could not have predicted. Something that was going to rearrange his entire life from the inside out. The man running the place was called Marcus. Marcus was not loud. He was not inspiring in the way people talk about in movies. He was quiet, steady, the kind of man who looked at you and you felt like he could see everything. Not just your face, everything. And the first thing Marcus did when Daniel walked in was not ask him questions. He did not ask where his music came from. He did not ask about his life or his past or his situation. He just looked at him, and then he said, "We are building things today. Call me and join. Come and join." That was all. No big speech, no ceremony, just an open door and a simple invitation. And Daniel joined. Music. And the first thing he tried to build was a disaster, a complete music disaster. His hands did not know what they were doing. He cut wrong. He measured wrong. He held tools the wrong way. And Marcus watched every single mistake happen. And here is the important part. Marcus did not criticize him, music, not once. He walked over, quietly, calmly, and he showed Music Daniel how it was done with his own hands, slowly, clearly. And then Music, he stepped back, and Daniel tried again. Day 11, he tried again, failed again, tried again. Day 12, something worked. Something small came together under his hands. That music actually made sense, that actually looked like what it was supposed to look like. And Marcus looked Music at it, and he nodded. Just one nod, a small nod. But that nod hit Daniel harder than any compliment, music he had ever received in his entire life. Because it was not given for free, because it was earned, and because music, no one had looked at something Daniel made and acknowledged it in a very, very long time. Music. And that nod became something. It became a reason to come back the next day. Music Day 15, Daniel showed up again. No one asked him to. No one reminded him. He just came because something had started pulling music him there. Not just the work, the feeling of being somewhere he was needed, of doing something that someone else music could actually use, of not being invisible. Day 17, Marcus introduced him to a woman who ran a small food stand music 2 streets away. Her name was Sarah. She needed someone to help her carry and set up supplies every music morning. By early before 5, Daniel said yes without hesitation. And the next morning, he was there at 4:30 carrying boxers in the dark, stacking things, preparing for music, a day that had not even started yet. The work was invisible. No one saw him doing it. But the PE was real, small, but real. And when Sarah handed him that first amount of money at the end of the week, Daniel held it in his hand, and music, something changed inside him that he could not explain with words. Because it was not just money, it was proof. Proof that he, music, could do something. Proof that someone was willing to pay him for his time and his effort. Proof that he was not useless. And for someone who had spent months believing he was exactly that, useless. That proof was worth more than the money itself. Day. He was doing 2 things now. Music. The community center with Marcus in the afternoons. The food stand with Sarah in the mornings. And music, he was tired. His body was sore. His hands were rough, but he was not complaining. Music, because for the first time in months, his days had shape. They had structure. They had meaning. Music. And every evening when he came home and looked at that number on the wall, he crossed off another day. And watching that number shrink felt like watching himself, music, grow. Day 24. Day 24. Something shifted in how Daniel, music, carried himself. He stood a little straighter. He looked people in the eye when he talked to them. He spoke with a little more weight, music, behind his words. It was subtle, but it was there. And the people around music, him, started to notice. Marcus noticed. Sarah noticed. Even the people at the community center who did not know his name started to notice. There was something different about this young man. Something that had not been there 2 weeks ago. Day 28. Music. And this is where the story takes its first real turn. Ruth walked into the community center that afternoon. Music. She was not there to volunteer. She was not there to learn anything. She was there because she needed help, real help. She ran a small business, handmade household items, good quality, but she, music, was one person doing everything alone. and she was drowning quietly, slowly, music, but drowning. And Marcus, without Daniel knowing, had told her about him. Marcus had told Ruth exactly what he had seen in Daniel over the past 18 music days. A man who showed up, a man who did not complain, a man who was getting better every single day. Music, Ruth walked in, and she watched Daniel work for about 15 minutes. She did not interrupt. She did not say anything. She just watched. And then she walked up to him, music, and she said, "I need someone exactly like you. Not next week, music today." And here is the moment that everything hinges on, because when Ruth said those words, something happened inside Daniel. The old voice came back loud clear. It said, "Music, you are not ready, you will fail. You always fail." And for 1 second, Daniel almost listened to music. It almost said no, almost walked away the way he had walked away from everything else before. But music did not. He looked at Ruth and he said, "Yes." One word, yes. And that one word became music, the door through which his entire life walked into a new direction. The work with Ruth was nothing like working with Marcus. Marcus was music patient. Ruth was not. Ruth was sharp. She expected things done right. She expected them done fast, music, and she expected them done without excuses. And in the first few days, Daniel struggled. The pressure was real. The music standards were high. And there were moments, several of them, when he wanted to quit, when the weight of it felt too music much, when that old familiar feeling of not being good enough crept back in and whispered, "This is too hard. You, music, are not built for this." But Ruth had seen something in Daniel that Daniel had not yet seen in himself, and she refused to let him disappear back into that old version of himself. One evening, music, after a particularly bad day, after Daniel had made a mistake that cost them hours of work, music, and he was sitting there staring at the ground ready to give up. Ruth sat down next to him, and she did not comfort him. She did not say it is okay. She looked at him straight, music, and she said this. She said, "The people who fail in life are not the ones who lack talent. They are the ones who stop before anyone could show them what they were actually music capable of. You have not stopped, so do not stop now. Keep going." And Daniel kept going. Dave, he was faster now, sharper. He was learning the business from the inside. Not music, just how to make things, how to think about things, how things connected. Music, how one small decision in the morning could change everything by the end of the day. Music. And Ruth started trusting him with more, not just tasks, decisions. Music. She started asking him what he thought, and Daniel gave answers. Music. Real answers. Thoughtful answers. Thoughtful answers. Answers that surprised even Ruth. And that surprised Daniel, music too, because he did not know he had those answers inside him. He did not know he had been music, absorbing that much until he opened his mouth and it came out. But it was not all smooth. There were music days when things went wrong, days when a batch of products came out wrong and had to be thrown away, days when a supplier did not deliver and everything shifted, days when Ruth and Daniel disagreed about something and the tension between them was thick enough to feel. And on those days, Daniel Music learned something important, something that no book could ever teach him. He learned that building something real is music, not just about the good days. It is about what you do on the bad ones. It is about showing up when showing up feels pointless. And it is about not running when things get hard. Because things always get hard. Music. That is not a sign that something is wrong. That is a sign that something is real. Day 40. Music. The money was growing slowly but growing, enough to cover his room, enough music to eat properly for the first time in months, enough to buy things he needed without calculating whether music, could afford them. And Daniel started to feel something that he had almost forgotten existed. Stability, the quiet feeling of knowing music, that tomorrow was going to be okay, that he was not going to wake up with nothing, that the ground beneath him was music, finally, after all, this time solid. And that feeling, music, that feeling of solid ground was addictive in the best way. Because once you feel it, music, once you know what it is like to stand on something firm after standing on nothing for so long, you never want to go back ever. He started noticing something in the people around him. The way they looked at him, music had changed. Not just Marcus and Ruth. Everyone, the your neighbors, music, the shopkeepers, the people at the community center, they looked at him like he was someone, not just a body taking up space, someone who mattered, someone who was becoming something real. And that look, that shift in the way music other people saw him was like fuel poured onto a fire that was already burning inside him. Day 50. Ruth told him something that evening that stopped music him in his tracks. She told him the business numbers were up. Not a little, noticeably. And she told him music was because of him, because of the quality he was bringing, because of the way he was showing up every music single day without fail. And she looked at him and she said, "You are not just working for me anymore. Daniel, you are building this with me." And those words, "building this with me," landed inside Daniel Music, like an anchor dropping into deep water, because no one had ever said anything like that to him. No one had ever included him, music, in something like that, and it changed something. It changed the way Daniel saw himself. Music, not as someone who was being helped, as someone who was helping, as someone who was necessary. Day Music 58. Daniel had saved enough to move. Not to music somewhere big. Not somewhere impressive, but somewhere better. A place music with a real window. A window that looked out onto a street where people walked and life music moved. And on the first morning, he woke up in that place and looked out through that window. He stood there for a long time because that view, music, that simple, ordinary view of a street with people on it, was the most beautiful thing he had seen in years. Not because it was beautiful, but because he, music, had earned it. Every single part of that view was the result of 58 days of music showing up, of trying, of not giving up. And he knew that. Music. He felt that in his bones. And then day 60 had happened, and everything almost came crashing music down. Ruth called him that night. Her voice was different, tight, controlled. The kind music of voice people use when they are trying very hard not to sound scared. She told him to come to the shop now, not tomorrow, now. And something in music, the way she said it, made Daniel's stomach drop before he even knew what music was wrong. When he arrived, Ruth was sitting at the table. The lights were low, papers were spread out in front of her. Numbers, music lists, calculations done by hand because she could not afford to outsource anything. And she was staring at those papers the way a music person stares at something that is telling them news they do not want to hear. Daniel sat down across music from her, and because he could see that she was not ready to talk yet. She was still processing it herself. Then music, looked up, and she told him a big company had moved into their area. Not a small company, not a local one, a company with resources that music Ruth could not even begin to imagine. A company that had warehouses and delivery systems and music advertising budgets that were bigger than Ruth's entire yearly earnings. They sold the same kind of products that music Ruth sold, but their prices were lower, much lower, so much lower that there was no way Ruth could match them. Music, and in just 10 days, Ruth had lost more than half of her customers, more than half. The people who had been buying from her for months, the people who knew her, the people who liked her products, they had simply gone to the cheaper option. Because that is what people do when money's tight. They go where the price is lower. It is not a choice music made out of cruelty. It is a choice made out of survival. And the numbers on the table in front of Ruth told one very clear story. Music. If this continued, if even one more week passed like this, the business would not survive the month. It would close. Everything Ruth had built over the music past years, everything she had poured her life into, would disappear. And not just her income, her music identity, her purpose, the thing that made her feel like she mattered. Daniel sat music there, and he listened to every word. And when Ruth finished, she looked music at him, and in her eyes he saw it. Fear. Real, genuine fear. The kind that music comes from watching something you built with your own hands start to fall apart in front of you. Music and not knowing how to stop it. The kind of fear that does not make noise. The kind that sits quietly inside your chest. Music and squeezes. And Daniel looked at those papers and he looked at Ruth, and something music inside him ignited. Not fear, not panic, not the old, hopeless music feeling of giving up. Something else entirely. Something sharp. Something focused. Something that felt like every single day of the last 68 music days being compressed into one single moment of absolute clarity. He knew exactly what had to be done. He stood up and he said, "The big music company can beat us on price. They can beat us on speed, but they cannot beat us on one thing. And that one thing is the music truth. The real story behind this business, who built it, why it matters, music, and who in this neighborhood has the to keep it alive." Ruth looked at him, and for music, the first time in a very long time, something shifted in her expression. It was not fear anymore. It was music, something else. It was the look of someone who had just realized that the person sitting across from them was no longer the same person who had walked in music 60 days ago. The next morning, Daniel went to see Marcus. He told him music, everything, the problem, the plan, and Marcus listened. And when Daniel finished, Marcus did not hesitate. He said, "Mon T,